Thank you very much. It's always a really enjoyable conference to come to here. And I will confess that when I got the email this year asking me whether I would like to speak, I did write back and I said, really, you want me to speak again at this conference? And they, I think flatteringly, said, oh yes, you've become an institution. So I'm really hoping that that has nothing to do with my age and everything to do with my ability to hopefully keep you entertained for a few minutes on the morning after the night before, which I know has always been a really other important tradition of the Interchange conference. So I'm going to talk to you today about systems thinking. Systems thinking is one of those things that many of us talk about and think about and aspire to. But I'm going to talk about what we, working within the transport system, need to do to make systems thinking a reality. So, like me, you probably go to lots of events like this. And lots of people say wise words, and you go away and think, yes, terribly important. Systems thinking, I really want to do that. I really want to make things different within the sector that I work in. And we've had lots of organisations who've helped us to aspire to systems thinking. The Government Office for Science has produced some really good toolkits on systems thinking. The Royal Academy of Engineering have produced some fantastic resources that talk about how systems thinking can make a difference in complex engineered systems such as we encounter within transport. Universities are starting increasingly to teach elements of systems thinking as part of engineering degrees. So why doesn't it happen in reality? Why do we have chats at events like this over coffee? Why do we go away from discussions thinking about how we feel so frustrated at having to point out the bleeding obvious, the connections that can be made between different parts of our transport system? Yet, despite the considerable influence and energy within this room, we go away and we end up working in our traditional siloed contexts. So I'm going to propose that there are some things that we can do as a community to make systems thinking a reality. And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts about these as well. So I'm going to give away my punchlines first. I think there are 4 things we can do, all of us, to help make systems thinking a reality. We can help each other to see the whole picture. We can speak a common language. We can encourage a culture of curiosity, and we can inspire innovators. So I'm going to talk through each of these 4 notions and hopefully persuade you to go away and remember those 4 notions and enact them in the work that you're doing within the transport system. So let's take that first one, seeing the whole picture. I live in a town just outside Nottingham, as a couple of people also in the room do, and it's near a high-speed railway line. And like in over 6,000 places in the UK, there are several foot and road crossings along the line. And sadly, there have been several tragic incidents in our local area which have led to injury and fatalities in these settings. As a result of this, quite reasonably, and in line with the absolute commitment to safety that we see within our UK railways, a few years ago now, Network Rail consulted on closing 2 of these foot crossings across the line. Sounds perfectly straightforward. We have a vulnerability within our transport system. Why would we want to retain something that presents a risk in our engineered system when there is a solution available to prevent that risk? And what happened? There was strong public opinion that the crossings should be kept open. Why? It was about seeing the whole picture. It was a systems issue. Crossing that line gives many people access to our local nature reserve, Attenborough Nature Reserve, attracts over 500,000 visitors per year, and also provides access to a nearby canal and heritage centre that brings economic value and community to the local setting. The vast majority of visitors to these areas arrive by walking, and many of them use that foot crossing. Now, a review from the University of Edinburgh in 2018 showed the positive impact of walking on mental health. The impact both from a preventative and a treatment effect on depression and anxiety, and emerging evidence for a treatment effect. So if you're experiencing psychological stress, going walking can alleviate those experiences. Green, outdoor and nature environments are particularly beneficial. And the economic and social costs to England of mental health in 2022 were estimated to be £300 billion. A study by Glasgow Caledonian University showed that people from deprived areas can cut their risk of developing chronic life-shortening conditions by up to 15% if they live within 700 metres of a well-developed canal. They did this work by looking at the medical records of over 100,000 people living within reach of the Forth and Clyde Canal in areas of high socioeconomic deprivation. They found that their experience of living near the canal was associated with a lower risk of diabetes by 12% and a lower risk of obesity by 10%. So we've got a tension here. We've got a positive opportunity to give people experience of active travel in an outdoor nature-based environment, but we've got an engineering risk of the presence of a very known challenge of exposure to our railways. But the wider system was more complex than the individual KPI on the railways of maintaining safety. So what tools have we got to help us see the big picture? If you have a look on gov.uk for systems thinking tools, you'll see lots of tools like this. This is an approach that we call rich picture analysis that many of you will be aware of. Rich picture analysis identifies different stakeholders within a complex setting. It looks at what their different motivations are, everything from a government department to local communities. And it thinks about what we might need to do to resolve those tensions. And there are formal expert methods we can use, things called abstraction hierarchies, where we can look at overall system goals of a system and trace down the impacts to the physical elements of the system to understand what changes to different parts of the system have on achievement of those overall goals. But there's a challenge. These tools require specialist knowledge and time to develop. They can come across as procrastination or distraction. I spoke to a colleague, and I still remember her words. We were working on a very tricky policy problem within the Department for Transport. And she said to me, if someone shows me another diagram with boxes and arrows, I'm going to scream. So actually, the practicality of a big picture analysis is not helpful to someone who's been given a very difficult and specific job within an organisational structure. We don't always give people the tools, the freedom and the time to be able to think about big systems. So what happened with our level crossing? Well, actually, systems thinking worked. The community engagement worked. The importance of the crossing to the local community was recognised, but the risk was also alleviated. The initial solution has been to put a traffic light system in place so that people can be warned of the presence of oncoming trains and therefore mitigating against the accidental risk of being on the railway line when there was actually a risk and a danger present. And long term, there are plans to build a bridge over the railway line, which is of course an even safer mechanism and intervention. So that's our first task, seeing the whole picture. So let's think about the second task, speaking a common language. I'm going to say some phrases that are versions of phrases I have heard within the last week. I've got one BCR here of 1.2 and one of 1.4. I don't think either of them are great VFM, to be honest, and I'm not sure they're going to generate IP. I've spoken to EPSRC and Research England. We need to think about Ref 2029. How does the ODP relate to the IDP? Do we know if the driver was using DCAS? We find ourselves in meetings like this every week. I still remember the first meeting I was in within the rail industry where I felt so proud because I understood the difference between a PICOP and a SPAD. And of course, SPAD now means something completely different in government as well, just to confuse things. We used to get, and I tried to find a picture of it, a physical jargon buster that was proudly given to you, a ring-bound document that was actually almost your initiation into the mysterious world of rail. But speaking a common language is about much more than words and acronyms. We've now got to consider our need to speak a common language when it comes to data. We've got everything from geospatial data giving us information about small and critical changes happening to ground infrastructure, to real-time information being used by people like the port operators in Dover to manage the flow of traffic in times of congestion there. We know that we've got new technologies that are changing the expertise we need within our systems, from quantum technologies to artificial intelligence. This is only going to get more challenging in terms of that ability to speak a common language. And I forgot, I had some photos of the proud documents we have within our transport system here. We know that there have been incidents, and this is the Mars Climate Orbiter incident from 1999, where a confusion between metric and imperial measurements led to the failure of the mission. In the context of systems thinking, I think common language is also about having common purpose. We have got some excellent innovations starting to emerge, though, that are helping us with this, recognizing that we've got diffuse data sets, diffuse languages, and helping people to see them integrated. And I'll give you two examples here. First of all, I'm a real fan of the CityMapper application. CityMapper is a tool that we all know and love and can really, really help us when we are starting to think about how to plan multimodal journeys. It builds on diffuse, non-common data sets, but it makes them feel synergetic, it makes them feel integrated. We haven't designed an integrated transport system in all of the contexts that CityMapper is applied, but it feels like an integrated transport system because of the language that is used. And if we think about how we describe our engineering systems, I have to admit I was really naive. I didn't realise how many different ways there were of counting carbon impacts of engineering interventions when we're looking at major infrastructure projects. Some work that's been led by ADEPT as part of the Live Labs programme has been thinking about how we can establish common methodologies for carbon baselines for interventions in road infrastructure being led by local authorities around the UK. So genuinely sometimes requiring people to speak the same language is also something that we can do. But I think there's a culture as well. Remember me as an early career academic in that railway meeting? Frankly, I think some people were deliberately using those acronyms to intimidate me, to make me realise I had to earn my spurs to be part of the communication. If we're those people, we need to stop doing that. And if we're those people, we need to enable and encourage a culture where people feel okay to ask what something means. I can tell you who the best question asker I have ever met is, and it's one of my bosses, the Government Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Dame Angela McLean. Now, when you're the Government Chief Scientific Advisor, you've probably got enough confidence to admit that you don't know something. Making sure we're encouraging an environment that enables everyone to feel it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, could you please clarify, is something we can all do now. So that's our second task, speaking a common language. Let's move on to the third one, a culture of curiosity. This, for me, is the secret ingredient of systems thinking. We can have all the models and methods we want, but actually systems thinking is about a mindset. It's about being curious. It's about thinking all the time, why? Let me give you an example. Many of you here will be familiar with the safe systems model. The safe systems model has really transformed the way that we think about road safety. It's identified those different elements of road safety, safe road users, safe speeds, safe vehicles, and post-crash response. But actually, often the really important thing of the safe systems model that is occasionally forgotten is the bit in the middle, the philosophy that comes with safe systems thinking, recognizing people make mistakes, humans are vulnerable, and responsibility is shared, the approach needs to be proactive, and actions are systemic. So what does that mean? Let's consider an imaginary incident. We've got something like this, very common in the UK, a roundabout. And sometimes we know there can be collisions as a vehicle approaching the roundabout ends up colliding with a vehicle already on the roundabout. So we might go along and we might analyse it. We might think, was the driver driving too fast? Was there something that was occluding their vision on the road? Was their vehicle in poor condition? But we might also think, why was the driver driving in the first place? Maybe the driver was driving fast. Maybe they were driving fast because they had a member of their family in the car with them. And maybe they didn't have confidence that if they phoned for an ambulance would arrive in time to get that person to the hospital. That's a good example of the systemic impacts that we're seeing on our transport systems in the UK at the moment. We know that sometimes there are factors that influence behaviours, that influence choices, that influence decisions that are out with the immediate transport system. Now, that doesn't necessarily help us if it's something that we feel we can't control, but it is something that is important for us to acknowledge and then think about how we can make sure that the elements we can control can recognise the complexity of the setting in which we're based. So, how do we become systems thinkers? I'm a human factors professional, as some of you are in the audience, and as many of you know, and the way I describe human factors is people are fallible and people are brilliant. Our job is to minimise the impact of human fallibility and maximise the value of human brilliance. I don't remember a moment in any of my training where I was sat down and taught to be a systems thinker, but it's absolutely endemic in everything that we do. How do we make sure that everyone has this constant thread of systems thinking and curiosity in everything that they do? And many of you will know, if you ever go to an event where there's more than one human factors person in the room, there's a slightly explosive impact because we all get terribly excited by the curiosity that we all manage to bring to the room. So that's task 3, creating a culture of curiosity. So let's bring us to our final task. Task 4, inspire and empower innovators. You may think that innovation is a different topic to systems thinking, but I think they are inextricably linked. Innovation, by definition, disrupts, and that can have effects on a whole system. It means we have to change things. It can be uncomfortable. It can be annoying. And sometimes the context we're in does not enable innovation to thrive. We've got lots of interventions to support early stage technologies, pull them through the technology readiness levels. But we know we have a challenge within the UK of monetising the impact of innovation to deliver economic value, whether that's reducing the cost of transport infrastructure or delivering new solutions to help people travel across our complex infrastructure. One of my favourite examples is some work that was done in HS2 a couple of years ago that I thought genuinely encouraged a culture of innovation. What was really interesting was the different solutions, which looked at everything from digital solutions to evaluate the quality of concrete, to a new solution to use suction-based technology to remove the poor quality top element of the concrete piles, thus not only reducing waste, but also increasing the speed with which the pile operation was completed and reducing the period of time for which the West Coast main line needed to be closed. But what was really powerful when I visited this site was the culture. These innovations were brought on by young people who were working as newly qualified engineers within the setting, and they were empowered not only to come up with new ideas, but to try them, demonstrate them, and implement them. How many opportunities do we have as a community to inspire and enable innovations in the settings in which we're based? So that's my final sort of request to you all. How do we inspire innovators? So none of what I've said today is radical. None of what I've said today is revolutionary. It could be that I've stated the bleeding obvious, but we're not doing it. So what do we need to do it? I think that there are small actions we can all take, thinking about the methods to help us see the whole picture, thinking about the language that we use and that culture of enabling asking questions, encouraging and ourselves asking those questions why, and making sure that where we have the opportunity we can inspire innovation. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Who knows, maybe I'll see you next year. And I look forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Really fascinating as ever to hear your thoughts on your subject. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a huge amount of time, so I just wanted to ask you one question and give our audience an opportunity to ask a few questions as well. how do you see the relationship between human behaviour and transport tech evolving, especially with the rise of smart transport systems and AI? What are your thoughts on that?
So we've already seen human behaviour evolve as we've got technology coming through. I mentioned the City Mapper application in my talk. We know that through the provision of real-time information that people trust, people are making different choices about the modes that they're using. We particularly saw from Transport for London, I'm sure there's people here from Transport for London who were involved in this, when they made data open and they gave people access to real-time information, particularly about buses, they saw the uptake in the use of buses change very significantly. But we do need to continue to monitor the different types of people who are using our different types of transport systems. You mentioned that we were previously at a Women in Transport event, and we know there are some real challenges around safety for women in transport systems. So understanding the different demographics of people who are using different transport solutions, I think, is also important.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Questions, anybody? Any questions from the floor? Do we have any questions? Don't be shy. This is fantastic. Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Thank you, Sarah. Adam Simmons from National Highways. In your first example, you talked about perhaps the tension of a safety KPI with systems thinking. Do you feel that perhaps the KPIs we have really are key indicators, and what might make a good KPI to enable that systems-based thinking?
So it's a really great question, and I will remind everyone that I'm an advisor to the Department for Transport, not a decision maker of the Department for Transport in my answer to this question. I think there are different types of KPIs. We talk a lot about leading and lagging indicators, and something that I am a big supporter of to really encourage that systems-based thinking is identification of meaningful leading indicators. I think leading indicators which can be early warnings, so in that roundabout example, we know there's real promise in hard braking incident data, for example, which are not accidents that represent vulnerabilities within our road system, but do give us indication as to where we might need to look at what's going on and intervene. I think they can be really rich sources, but also they encourage that other part of what I was saying, which is asking the question why. So I do think that particularly in the context of safety, where thankfully we actually have relatively few killed and serious injured incidents in our roads and our railways in the UK compared to many other nations, but that doesn't mean we can be complacent, and actually thinking about those leading indicators I think can be very, very powerful.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions? Yes. Right here, thank you.
Morning, Sarah. Glenn Lyons, Mark McDonald. Thank you ever so much for that presentation. I was pleased, but also, of course, challenged by the fact that you finished by saying we're not doing it. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit about why you think we're not doing it.
Yeah, I think that very often the realities of organisational structure thwart us. So how many of us have had to carve out time in our day to come here? How many of us, like me, have managed to get to a couple of events, but also are squeezing in a few work meetings as we go along? So I think, first of all, we are time poor, and some of these things take time. One of the things I do, and I really cherish, is my walk to the railway station in the morning when I'm travelling by train. And I deliberately choose to walk because I get the exercise and I get a bit of thinking time. And I think that building in thinking time is important. But I also think there's responsibility for us when we're setting objectives for individuals within our teams. Very often, we expect people to do systems thinking and then we judge them by elements of work that are not systems-based. And so thinking very carefully about the behaviours we're encouraging when we're setting goals for individuals in teams is, I think, something that we really need to think about very carefully.
Thank you, Sarah. We have time for one final question if we have somebody. Yes, gentleman over here, thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew Linfoot, Director for Landscape Architecture at Jacobs. Have you considered introducing a swear box equivalent for meetings where three-letter acronyms are overused?
I haven't personally. It would be good, wouldn't it? We're going to have a very tough spending review ahead. Maybe this is the solution. No, but I think that one of the things we can do, and I was in a meeting with someone just earlier this week where it was an academic event, and we were having a pre-conversation, and I used the word BCR, and someone who was a vice-chancellor of the university said, you'll need to explain to the audience what BCR is. So actually, we talk a lot in equality, diversity and inclusion about making a kind connection. I think we should be making a kind connection. And I think that if you're the most senior person in the room or a brave person in the room, just saying, excuse me, could you just explain what that means is the good way to do it. But if needed, then a swear box could well be an excellent solution.
I think, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this morning. Sarah, it's wonderful to see you again. You are a bit of a rock star amongst us women in, well, I'm not really a woman in transport. I use transport. I'm going to class myself as a woman in transport. Thank you very much for coming. Everybody, Professor Sarah Sharples.